of North America marketing at Ensono. And I've known Aaron for some time as both a practitioner and a colleague when we worked together at Serious Decisions and Forrester. And I'm super excited to have Aaron's perspective today on how to really kick off the journey of sales and marketing alignment as marketing leader coming into an organization. How do you build that relationship? And how do you build the foundation for sort of ongoing marketing success? And you may even have some tips for how to talk about marketing investment and winning marketing investment. So lots of good stuff, Aaron. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, Megan. The only thing that, gave me any anxiety about participating was your comment that I have to be really funny. And so nothing but pressure that I've been sweating about all morning. So we'll see what we can do.
I'm hopeful. You have to, for people who haven't interacted with Aaron before, he's usually one of the funniest people in any given meeting, but hey, maybe today will be the exception that proves the rule. We'll find out anyhow, but thanks again for joining us. And John, kick us off. This is a great poll. I love this question.
Yeah. So the reason I came up with this poll is I noticed, first of all, everybody was an interesting end of the year with the pandemic and kind of people getting a little bit of fatigue with the digital fatigue. And I think people were really looking forward to the holiday and unplugging and recharging, at least the ones that I've been talking with. And they were thankful and grateful to get that time away. And then they came into the new year, and like a lot of companies, they're still firming things up. But I kind of wondered in the back of my mind, were people not having their plans in place because of the pandemic? Like, was that slowing things down, or is it just business as normal or business as usual? But I noticed that there was a little bit of lag on the marketing side of getting connected with people. And, some of that could be sales kickoffs, virtual sales kickoffs, maybe even in-person kickoffs that may be happening. So I just wanted to ask the question, where do people stand in terms of their budget planning process? Is it known, or is it unknown and kind of work in progress for 2022? And, not a lot of votes here. 13 votes is not quite statistically significant, but interesting that it was so close, in terms of the split. Obviously, one vote here probably separated the difference, but pretty much split down the middle. I actually would have thought that more people wouldn't have their plan, kind of fully baked. So I was a little bit surprised that 2022 is as baked as people are saying, given the climate that we're currently in. But I don't know, Megan, what was your reaction to this?
Well, I agree with you. I thought more people would not have had it done. I think historically, what we saw at Forrester / Sirius was very often marketers started the year not only without a budget that was finalized, but sometimes without a plan that was finalized because corporate objectives and sales goals hadn't been finalized. And that's a tricky place to be, because if you don't know what it is you're trying to deliver to the business, it's really hard to go back and say, okay, this is the budget that I need. And I think that's what leads to some of the bad habits we see in marketing around sort of starting with last year and adding some, as opposed to, going back to the drawing board and really saying, okay, what are the objectives of the business? What's marketing's appropriate contribution? How do I prioritize what I can do? And then how do I estimate what I'm going to need in terms of a budget and people to do it? That's the trouble with this, right? And I think that's where sometimes having your plan in place as marketing can also be a challenge if it's just a marketing plan. Sometimes it needs to be it needs to be a revenue plan. It needs to be a go-to-market plan, not just a marketing plan. So I would be interested to know how many people who said they have their plan in place have an aligned plan in place as opposed to a plan. So anyhow, and with that though, Aaron, you and I have just been catching up on some of the great work that you're doing at Ensono, you and your team. And one of the things you spoke about was, sort of making the case for additional investment in marketing kind of going into this year. Tell us the secret. This is a hard one. Like, what did it take to help to and not only get that plan in place, but get some get an appropriate amount for marketing to be able to reach its goals? What do you think?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was looking at the poll results, John, that you just had up on screen, and it was a relative split. We know what our plan is, or it's a work in progress. And as I'm thinking about our environment today, the first thought is I could have answered both, right? So right on the line and split it completely. And I think it's always going to be a work in progress. But where I got hung up thinking about that was, and I'm getting a reputation already here at Ensono for being a stickler for word definition. Like, let's be super clear, no ambiguity on what we say when we're using any word, whatever it is. And for me, it was that comment in that first option for that poll of, we know what our plan for FY22 is going to look like. And to me, my question is, it depends on who we is in that scenario, because we, perhaps as a marketing function, will always know what our plan is. Now, whether or not that ladders up and connects back to big picture business objectives or even aligns with sales and growth goals, sometimes that remains to be determined, right? But we typically will have some idea. It's that massive challenge or that secret we always want to solve for, which is when we say we, is that really the full revenue engine? Does sales have confidence that what we want to spend our investment dollars on is going to yield things that are impactful, and more importantly, actually impactful to them as well and to the growth of the business? I don't know that there is a secret to sort of erasing that ambiguity beyond having those conversations, building that trust, building those relationships, and ultimately removing the ambiguity of what we're talking about with whatever we're saying and whatever we're planning and how we're trying to do that.
Say what you mean and mean what you say, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you've been at Ensono a little while, and you've held, different marketing leadership roles, as well as worked with a whole lot of different organizations as a principal consultant within Forrester and Sirius. I think a lot of people, when they step into a new marketing leadership role, wonder, like, what is the best way to use sort of that honeymoon period, that first 100 days when you're coming into the organization and honeymoon's probably a little strong, but that initial opening when everything is a blank piece of paper and you really got this opportunity to understand. What is some advice you'd offer to people stepping into that if your mission is better aligned sales and marketing?
Yeah, I think my time at Sirius Decisions and Forrester has served me well and will continue to serve me well in that regard, because as a consultant in that environment, it was my job to work with, as you know, hundreds of clients, right? And hundreds of market segments and hundreds of industries and all of these different scenarios that could be of big sales organizations, all indirect sales, you name it. And so the process of sort of doing and learning how to do discovery and getting up to speed as quickly as possible, that was a great muscle memory that came out of just constantly talking to new organizations and figuring out what are the quickest, best questions to ask to figure out, hey, what's the real lay of the land here, right? Where are the bodies buried, to coin a very awkward phrase. And so that, I think, has been really helpful then and since. The biggest thing when I got to my current role in Sono, I was very fortunate with the timing, because I joined the organization right after we actually were acquired by a private equity firm. And so that sort of set the tone already for, hey, change is coming, right? Change is going to be pervasive throughout our functional day-to-day jobs, all the way to how we define and assign goals. And in the process of me starting, that acquisition announcement going through, it was maybe 3 weeks later where I was already participating in the regional strategy meeting and presenting what is marketing's plan, what does that picture look like? And so, I quickly set about kind of figuring out, well, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and more importantly, what's the perception for sales in terms of what marketing's role is, what value can we drive, and so on. And I remember standing up there, 3 weeks into the role and then into a new company. I mean, I didn't even know where the restrooms were at that point, which is awkward because I work from home. But 3 weeks into that situation and saying, look, I'm hearing that you think marketing does and does not do these things. And we are fine being that, that throat to choke, if you will, and we'll be the first to say marketing didn't deliver or we underperformed in these areas, so long as it's clear that what we're all trying to do is aligned and it's meaningful as well. So we're not just sort of, utilizing marketing time and dollars to do something that we think is engaging and meaningful to sales when it just simply isn't. So let's hit that Nintendo reset. Let's start over and talk about it. What do you think we should be doing as a marketing function? And then let us respond and tell you if we think we can, we will, and to what scale, and then start that negotiation.
You said a lot of interesting things there, Aaron. And one thing that stuck out to me was the PE portion of things. And that's valuable experience to have. I have seen kind of the venture side as a CMO, but I've not seen the PE side. And I've noticed the VCs it's a different language that you typically use with the VCs of trying to educate on marketing or was. I would guess that the PE firm has either a lot of pressure to monetize. Like how are they looking at marketing maybe differently from what you've seen in the past, or what's their mindset going into the conversation?
Yeah, I'm happy that it is, of the same philosophy as I would be, which is how do we talk about and validate marketing's role as strategy, right? And so really as an equal partner, an aligned partner with the other key functions of the business. And if historically, digging through the paper and looking at the numbers, we're seeing that, the investment in marketing maybe has or has not matched the same pace as other functions and other organizations at the company. How can we bring that to maybe a greater, reach into parity in that regard? And how does that impact hiring? How does that impact what we're doing from our actual in-market spends, right? How do we look at the way that our structure is built and our ecosystem exists as marketing for an organization that we just acquired at this size, and to help it achieve the growth goals that we may have over the next 4 or 5 years? Where do we need to reorient our tools? What do we need to, it's always a common exercise. What should we stop, start, and continue, right? It's almost the same sort of at a much more formal and lofty level, but it's that same sort of thinking for marketing. What do we need to maybe stop doing because it either doesn't mean anything or it's not looked at as valuable? What can we start doing and demonstrate the value thereof and the business outcomes to expect? And what should we just continue doing? Because clearly we've grown to the certain size of revenue we are today. We've done great work to get there. Now it's more a matter of how do we step on the gas and keep those things going and adding to it.
When it comes to goal setting, tell me a little bit about how, you've made that happen. When you're sort of kicking off that relationship or even kicking off the year, to the point of our poll, what are some of the best ways you found to get aligned around your particular objectives?
Well, the biggest thing is, as I kind of made that comment earlier about look, marketing will be a throat to choke, right? Like we'll take responsibility for our contribution and all of that, so long as we even operationally look at our stake in the game as marketers from a revenue and bookings goal standpoint. If that hasn't necessarily existed before, our variable compensation, for example, maybe hasn't been based on the attainment of overall company revenue. Let's start with that, right? Let's make it a formal process where marketing also needs the same level of business objectives to be achieved in order for us all to win. I think that's a kind of an easy, and that's the first one. From there, it simply gets down into, what are the ways in which we can actually deliver against that? If those are the top line business objectives, then what should marketing's priorities be? How do they need to shift? How do we develop a strategy and plans and accommodate for dependencies and risks that might come our way as a result of that? And ultimately, again, paint the picture and put it on one piece of paper and say, this is what we think is going to be impactful. Sales, do you agree? It starts back at the beginning. We have our conversations around business objectives, and it can be simple. Top line revenue, to keep the lights on and to grow 10%. What are we looking at? What's that number? And then how do we actually perform historically to drive to that? Directly, indirectly, contributing, influence, you name it, right? It gets to be very mathematical very, very quickly. And I don't know, remember if the right brain or the left brain, the more creative side. That's where I started my career, was that way more right brain creative side. And so now, I was like, they said there'd be no math. Now it is all the math, right? And the quantitative analysis and really modeling what your impact can be based upon those goals.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you just brought to mind an area that I know you spent a lot of time thinking about and developing around large account based marketing. And I know you and one of my favorite people, Bob Peterson, have done a great job kind of putting together a methodology for that. How have you applied that within some of the roles that you have and thought about sort of bringing to bear that discipline around marketing and sales working together on the biggest accounts?
Yeah, I really appreciate that you brought that up, because how much time do we have? Because I love talking about that framework, that methodology. You're talking about the sort of this ABM large account planning approach, which I worked with Bob to help refine. And we have tried and implemented that to our strategic accounts here at Insono as a part of our business. So how do we follow a methodology? Was, again, all around establishing goals and then identifying who our audiences really are. And that's a great conversation to understand, hey, these long-term relationships that sales has had with existing accounts that they're very protective of. We go back 20 years, et cetera. Understanding, well, who are those folks and what do they care about, right? Like, how do we make them successful then, even on a one-to-one basis, and having that conversation around what are the things that we need to demonstrate to our audience and our buyers and prospects. And that's a great planning conversation with sales as well. And then it gets very sort of process oriented around thinking about the inventory and the content that you have, and does it communicate that message properly, and tactical planning and all of those things. And I love that methodology. And for me and our team here, the reason I think it's so important as a key initiative moving forward and part of our strategy is we have historically looked at our growth goals coming from the attainment of new logos, so net new business that we haven't worked with previously. And when you look at what our growth trajectory is, ultimately we have to invest in some level of client and install-based marketing. And for me, I think it's way more valuable to talk about completing a solution set or growing and retaining existing business through the way of account-based marketing planning that just shows that all of our growth that we want to accomplish, there's way less resistance, not less resistance, that makes it sound too easy, right? But it's just a much more enjoyable path to actually engage people you're already engaging with, to drive their business forward as their partner. And again, I think we kind of know that just yields long-term benefits all around when we do that. So we're doing that for our strategic accounts. We're going to expand that as we are able to continue to invest in that program. So the level of customization we'll need to execute against that program, and hopefully expand that to other market segments that we have in other regions. So we're excited about it.
What you're saying there makes a lot of sense in terms of the upsell and the cross-sell opportunities, just because in this environment, we find it's so challenging right now to get quick wins, and there seems to be a premium of quick wins. So why not focus on the lower hanging fruit, which you've identified there? I think that's a great point that you're making. How do you, when you're thinking about the strategic account focus, what kind of investment? Because when I think of strategic accounts, sometimes I think of the bigger companies like an Oracle or a Google or a very large company. How are you able to, at Ensono, like think through that model or scale it in a way that it works for you, maybe differently from a big company in that regard?
Yeah, that's a really great, interesting question, because we are, I mentioned the acquisition around 6-ish months ago or so, and what we've been known as historically at Ensono is one area as a managed service provider in the IT space, and we have sort of expanded and transformed our business to broaden our capabilities and our solution sets. And so that typically comes with, and this isn't indicative of Ensono, I mean, this is every sort of organization I've worked with. It's sort of looking at the business you are today and what business you want to be tomorrow, right? Disrupting your own business where your competitors do, but then learning how to talk about and tell that story to people that don't know you at all, people that only know you for one thing. When the ABM program comes up, we're talking about maybe, historical mainframe and mid-range solutions buyers for us. How do we take a look at those environments and transform those? What does that mean to transform? All of those factors that come into it. So we're in the process right now of redefining what our value proposition really is to tell that broader story. And with that will come a lot of great opportunities to drill down into business outcomes for our prospects and our existing customers. And if they are experiencing one level of a business outcome, it's our job to really think about, well, what is their Ensono experience, and how can we sort of make a better environment come together and come to life for them? That's the way we're sort of building our messaging and our investments, which I think is where you started before I took us way around this way. John, I apologize. Our investment strategy really is focused on then how do we make sure we are broadening to tell that story, both to people that don't know us at all, but then also identifying our current customers, where might they live on their life cycle with us, and how do we grow what that future looks like for them as well, and defining it together.
Aaron, I think that's a really important point, right? That shift to how do you tell that story to your existing customers? I think very often we assume our customers know way more about us than they know. And that's our fault, right? As marketers, because I think we're not the first thing they think about when they wake up in the morning. So, what may seem either intuitively obvious or like we've been hitting that, message a ton, it may not reach them. And very often organizations do a better job broadcasting to new logos and people that they want to attract than they do to keeping the people who already know and hopefully love them informed. So I think that's a really, a key point to say, do not neglect that channel. I actually just posted a link to a paper that one of my colleagues at Winning by Design, Ruloff, wrote on a study he did of European companies that had made a shift in the pandemic to focus on cross and upsell, I know out of necessity, because of buying cycles shutting down in net new, but the net effect was huge growth and making that shift. And what he's really highlighting here is the risk to going back to the bad old days of that exclusive focus on net new that's so tempting. And so I encourage people to have a look, because I think it's true for the US as well, and North America broadly. But I'd be curious, Aaron, one of the hard things about making the shift away from net new is how hard it is to measure the impact of marketing on cross-sell and upsell. And John, you may have recommendations for this too, but what are some ways that you think marketing leaders can measure and demonstrate their impact in that area when it's not a net new lead?
Yeah, I love this, because we're focused on this very actively right now, which is how do we demonstrate in our systems, and even what we maybe have in market for programming or assets, et cetera, and connecting the engagement that we may have at an existing account within a buying group to that actual outcome, which is, a sales qualified opportunity and what's developed in the system and all of that. So it's almost a matter of establishing some iteration of a conversion gate in your programming that shows that, look, if they were always buying product X from us, and then they engaged with this material, this asset, this tool, et cetera, that speaks to the broader picture. And on the other side of that engagement, there is interest. There are, buying signals and lead activities that are showing that they are now interested in broadening that conversation. I don't know that the battle will, be won easily ever, but at least sparks the conversation around marketing's role in generating that demand and that interest in that new solution set for that particular account and prospect.
No, it makes a ton of sense, make everything traceable. John, but I want to hear from you. Tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting conundrum with the measurement side. There's a lot of variables, but to net it out, we see, like, if you were trying to measure, you could pull it all off into a separate repository and do that measurement of the influence, in particular of the upsell. That requires a skill set to do, because you got a data warehouse and you need a data jockey. Or you can try to do it in your systems. The however on the systems is, in our experience, Salesforce has made it more challenging, significantly more challenging, to do the influence reporting if you're not using their ecosystem, meaning specifically Pardot. Anybody else, the campaign influence reporting has been sunset for Marketo, for Eloqua, for anybody else. So it makes it really, really challenging. Having said that, it's still a very viable approach. I guess the question I would come back, Aaron, to you on is, how then is marketing, or how should they be compensated? Is it on net new logos? Is it on net revenue retention? Like in that model of the influence side, what should be shifted, or what should marketers be asking for to get compensated on? Because I imagine a lot of marketers may not even think about it per se in their compensation packages.
This is not an all-inclusive answer, but I'm just a big believer in directly driving pipeline and revenue. So actual direct contribution to revenue from marketing sourced leads and or accounts. And that can be an unpopular point of view, right? Because a couple of things have to fall in place, as we know, and you just talked about some of them, right? Systems and operational reporting that even shows that capability is often a journey. Hopefully not, but often a journey, right? To set up and show that as things enter into our systems of record, we have lead sources really properly tracked and accounted for, and that then we'll be able to watch and accelerate that particular lead or account's journey through our waterfall, right? The next big challenge I kind of see there, beyond just the systems, is this concept of changing maybe a historical mindset of engagement, and an irrelevant engagement at that, in the sense of, hey, if we sell to account X and Steve the intern actually downloaded our white paper, but yet it was this buying group and this division and this region over here that actually created the opportunity, and we didn't have any interaction whatsoever, drove any engagement from that buying group, we didn't really influence or impact that account, right? I mean, it's happenstance that somebody kicked a tire that had the same last name as the person we ultimately sold to, or whatever the relationship is. And so for me, it's very much shifting, systems is one thing, solvable for sure. Culturally, though, shifting that expectation that, marketing really can deliver things of impact, and what they send over as far as a lead is concerned is worth our time to follow up because the quality is there. That's a journey as well. If you have leadership buy-in to go in that direction, you're better off. And that's where I think all of us in marketing are always striving to validate and we yearn for, right? That sort of executive buy-in that you're going to play this role. It's going to be great. It's meaningful to please do this. You are a profit center, not a cost center. Let's get going. And that's, I think, kind of the day-to-day that we're always hoping for, regardless of role, regardless of company.
Well, I can't really say much better than that. I think maybe that's a good moment to end on for today. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Some really great advice in here. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. And John, we hadn't met before today, so a pleasure to meet you. And Megan, as you said, we go way back. So always a pleasure to help out.
Likewise. Definitely appreciate it. And next week, Megan, we've got another one of your special guests. Megan joining us.
We have another Megan, yes, spelled slightly differently. Megan Keeney Anderson, who is formerly from HubSpot, a marketing leader at HubSpot, now CMO at Wanderlust Group. And she is here to talk about kind of an interesting subject, which is non-traditional work weeks. They've shifted to a 4-day work week and have found that it's actually had a very positive effect on